Hello, I'm AJ Makarapa and welcome to Sustainably Smart Talks. And today we want to talk about how can we fund the areas that need development because the imbalance of innovation and sustainable development is a big issue. And today to break down this topic, I'm joined by my guest, Alex Haydock-Wilson. Well, Alex, please introduce yourself to the viewers.
Hello, my name is Alex Haydock-Wilson. I have a very British name, but I am half British and I am half Congolese. My mom's side of the family are from Brazzaville. I visit very frequently and I have a strong interest and passion in the concept of development, even, and breaking down what that means for communities that have kind of thrived sustainably for thousands of years, but now due to the influx of sort of capitalist and Western sort of structures are now having to find their own form of development through also the sustainable ideals. So it's just sort of bringing indigenous ideas, indigenous frameworks to the concept of sustainability and seeing how those two feed into each other.
Who is Alex Haydock-Wilson? What would you say who that person is?
Alex Haydock-Wilson is mostly known as an athlete. I'm a 400-meter runner. I've won 2 Olympic medals in the relays for Great Britain. So most of my time I spend training, and most of these appearances I'm talking about my training and my athletics. But it's a real nice feeling to come here to be able to talk about the real sort of thing that's close to my heart.
Yes, indeed, because he's not only well accomplished in the track and field, he's also a well accomplished and well revered academic uh, person. And his research as well. He also a PhD student here at Loughborough University. Could you please tell us a little bit about your research?
Yes, so my research is in the field of sustainable technology. I work on solar panels, most specifically the first layer of the solar panel. Before you even get down to the device itself, you're having a lot that goes on or is dependent on the surface. So what you have is the device, and then you have a cover glass sheet over the top of it. And that cover glass sheet is typically coated in a material called porous silica or any other sort of anti-reflective coating, because reflectance is a big issue when it comes to incidence angles where the sunlight's facing. Just like a windscreen, you might see glare on your windscreen or your reflection in a mirror when the light is hitting it too intensely. That's lost energy. So what my research entails is creating new novel coatings and approaches that both mitigate the reflection and allow more light into the device, and
Yes.
mitigate the amount of, they call it in my field, soiling. Whenever I tell people that I work in anti-soiling technology, usually I get laughed at. I like to call it self-cleaning surfaces, because
Yeah,
we're talking about dust
I
accumulation,
agree with that.
and some people are childish, myself included. So I call it self-cleaning or soiling. And that's the concept of dust adhering to the panel surface and blocking out the sunlight. And we're looking at hydrophobic approaches to that. That's where my research is mostly at. So that's things that repel water. And what that means is it also has a repellency to the dust itself. But if dust does settle
Yes.
and then say it
Alex.
rains, which it does frequently in the UK, but also frequently in the Congo, it's quite a heavy rainfall. It's in the rainforest. Then you get this self-cleaning effect where the raindrops just sort of gather at the top and then slide down the panel, cleaning it as it goes along.
Oh wow, interesting, interesting. So you mentioned your family roots from the Congo. How has that shaped your way, your view of sustainability and innovation?
It in honestly, like I think it's fair to say that my upbringing being mostly in the UK, I kind of bought into the Western concepts of sustainability and innovation as an afterthought. You kind of build something, and it may be using fossil fuels and stuff like that, but as long as you like recycle it after the end of the day, or this afterthought of sustainability. Whereas when I returned to the Congo for the first time when I was
Yes,
6 years old, I was super inspired by the way that everything is, created from the land itself and returned to the land itself. Like my cousin was the same age as me when I returned, and he was making his own toys. And I felt I never thought where the toys come from. I was always, like being bought things that I'd throw away when I was bored of. And that's just wasn't a concept back home. And it enlightened me to a new way of thinking about consumption, that everything, appreciating that everything you take, you're pulling resource from a real thing, a real system, whether that be the land around you, whether that be the trees, whether that be from an animal. You live with the animals that you then go and eat. So there was also this, like, I don't know if you remember your first experience. I remember very well my first experience of like befriending the goat in the backyard, just thinking, cool, they got a pet goat. And then the goat disappears and you're like, where'd he go? And then he's like, that's all we're eating. And it's like, well, that's kind of like, as a child, you're like, oh, that's sad. You do then have an appreciation for the fact that if you choose to eat meat, you're actually eating a life, and there's a sort of honor to that. So it was more just around this idea of appreciation and gratitude, and taking care of how you're consuming, but also how we're in the modern age. We all benefit from the internet. We all benefit from these very energy intensive things. So it's like, cool, if energy is what we need, then how do we source and maintain that efficiently?
Okay. So what are you ultimately hoping your work contributes towards, both in Africa and globally? And globally,
yeah. This is the thing. I think while these concepts are new to Africa, if they can be scaled up and invested in and curated on a global scale, everyone gets to benefit from them.
I agree with that.
I think we're like the originators in many ways of a lot of soul and culture. And I think this is, instead of the commonly conceived notion of the West coming in and rescuing Africa from its own exploitation, we take control of the narrative and say, actually, we can save the world from its own greediness.
Yes, indeed, I agree with that. So you're saying creativity and innovation is also rooted in African culture.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any cases where you can actually demonstrate that we actually have been able to demonstrate sustainability, innovation in Africa?
Yes. So one of them is quite close to my heart and attached to a personal experience. I usually went to visit Brazzaville, that's the capital of the Congo, which was still a big paradigm shift away from what I'm used to here in the UK. But I was granted, by God's grace, the ability to paradigm shift even further when my family decided to go on a group trip to the village that we come from and see how things are done there. And there I saw for the first time the inherited craft of Nubian vault architecture and the process of building homes from scratch.
Nubian vault architecture is incredible.
Yes.
What lessons can modern developers take from designs that lasted centuries without advanced technologies?
Yes. So the concept of the architecture itself is that it is designed specifically and perfectly for the inhabitants and the community itself. You're using waste, you're using like dung from cows, and you're mixing that with the earth around you and drying that out, and then you're using that as the building blocks for your home. And what that enables is, it never gets too hot, it never gets too cool. It's a self-generating thing, and the skill and the craft required is something that is passed down generations. So there's also a type of economy that we don't really revere anymore well, currently I think in the West, which is this how do I say it, like the value of time spent
just Alex
passing on knowledge and the connect. So even, and I say we don't value it, but even this is an example of how like receiving information is so much easier when it's done conversationally, because we're social beings, right? Like I'd much rather learn in a conversation with a friend than I would learn if I were alone, sort of like reading a book. Like reading a book is great, but even the best books, the easiest reads are the ones that feel conversation.
Yeah, I agree with that, yeah.
So the more you can sort of tap into the social element of a human being, then the more value you can disseminate through knowledge systems. And even so even that time spent learning the craft is part of the value of of that home. We all built it. We learned how to build it from our ancestors, and therefore we hold and cherish that time spent.
Let's agree with that. Well, do you think then global sustainability movements sometimes overlook existing local knowledge?
Yes. They not just overlook it, it's almost more sinister than that. If you like, the coloniality machine is to sort of dismiss anything that it doesn't understand as being lesser than.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Because it doesn't evidently look through the lens of, like what the West perceives to be development. It's not familiar. But all the case studies that I also have researched across the continent also show this complexity that is complex because it's been passed down and organically refined by generations of work.
Generations, yes.
And you have to be able to be curious enough about it and investigate it to see that complexity. Otherwise, if you just come at it with a bulldoze lens and you all you see is what you want to see, which is often the justification has been that the complexity is less complex than what is perceived to be complex. And
Alex, well, you've done a lot of research into a lot of sustainable cases that are in Africa. Do you have any other more that we can have examples of where we had sustainable practices in Africa of inherent knowledge of the people?
So there are plenty. The one I'm going to start with is Konzo terracing. So Konzo is a tribe in Ethiopia. And a lot of these are from Ethiopia. They're heavy hitters when it comes to sort of development and culture. But the whole concept of this is in mountainous regions where water rainfall is scarcer, and then the typical sort of travel of rainfall is to sort of go through ground runoff and slide down the mountain. What they've had to do is try and find a way of containing this water flow and stopping soil erosion. So capturing the nutrients that would typically form at the top of this mountain and stopping them from being run off down the mountain. So what they've done is they build these stone terraces and they create a tiered agriculture system. And when you look at it on the hillside, it looks like Minecraft. Like, that's the best way of putting it. They've got real life Minecraft going on, and they've been doing this for hundreds, thousands of years. And it's ingenious because what you have is these fields that stack on top of each other.
Wow.
That are self-sustaining. They maintain the nutrients from here. The water is able to filter through the mountainside, and then you have the best quality crop throughout. And I think especially where there's volcanic rock and volcanic soil, that's some of the most nutrient-rich soil on the planet. So you end up with some of the most incredible produce, and it's no wonder why Ethiopia, the coffee bean was first discovered in Ethiopia.
It was
like this. So everyone's cup of coffee was that first originated in those kind of communities and that kind of agriculture. So often it's things that we overlook because we owe so much to the formulation of this technology, and it was taken for granted by those who discovered it. But it's just bringing a spotlight back on these things.
Yes, Alex.
And saying, how can we adopt this mentality in the way that we think sustainable, and then also come together closer as community, because that's what it was really built on at the end of the day.
Bringing the communities closer. Well, when you studied the concept of terrace agriculture, what struck you the most? Was it the method itself or the philosophy behind it?
It was 100% the philosophy behind it. I think that the method is ingenious, and as a scientist, I can really appreciate it. But it was also recognizing that it is holistically ingenious in the sense that you can appreciate it from any angle. And I think this disciplinary specialist way of appreciating things, when things are sort of segregated into I'm STEM, you're history, you're this. I think a lot of discourse that I see around development is what function does something serve and to whom can appreciate it.
That's true.
So when you see sort of like a big skyscraper in the middle of London, then maybe as an architect you might be able to appreciate that through your lens. But then there's been like people who appreciate more classic style of architecture feel left behind by that. And I think it's often like that lack of inclusion of like everyone has their point of view, and that lack of inclusion when it comes to making decisions based on developmental needs and goals can be the thing that leaves certain segments of society feeling left behind and disenfranchised. And it's just about that inclusiveness of like, this is the land. We honor the land. We honor the people. We honor the elders. We honor the children. We honor every single part of the system while we're in doing the blueprint, which takes more time and it takes more patience and it takes more talking.
Yeah, it takes more time and more patience. But imagine now, if you could have a magic wand and change one thing about how innovation and funding is handled globally, what would you change?
I would change who's in the room making discussions. I'd really broaden that out, and I'd change whose perspective has the most weight. I think we're in a system where like it's the investor, and because the investor gives the most, the investor says the most, and I think that misses one of these tenets of community, which is like, to give is to also is also to elevate the voice of that whose needs you're meeting. So while it's important to have investment, and I think it's important to then say, okay, whose voice is involved in this, who has probably been shrunk.
That I agree with, definitely.
And then just amplify it. Just say that's the most important person in the room, that person who wouldn't have a chance to speak based on their ability to contribute to like resource to the situation.
Yes, Alex. So it sounds like you're believing funding structures need a complete rethink.
Yes.
So what would an ideal future look for you in Africa?
Wow. An ideal future would look like, I think first and foremost, like a recognition and an unpacking of what it is that makes these like ancient but incredibly functional technologies so impressive.
Okay.
And an integration of that kind of school of thought into the way that we think about technological marvels to this day. So even the thing that inspires you. I notice have you done the tattoo conversation on this show yet?
Not yet. I haven't done the tattoo conversation yet, but go ahead.
I have to point out these tattoos. These are awesome. So you've got a ship on one arm.
Yeah, a ship.
I love that. And then you got a rocket on.
Rocket ship, because I'm launching my dreams up to the sky.
I just love that. We both have spaceships tattooed. I want to show mine. Mine's a little bit more tucked away, but I've got a spaceship as well. For similar reasons.
I appreciate you bringing them up. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing them up.
But like this is the kind of stuff that, you know, like would inspire you as like growing up. You see technological marvels like the space race, and you see these things, and that inspires you then to go and pick up a book and read about STEM. And I think the problem of there not being a book that says like, look how cool this thing is.
Yes, indeed.
And it's like, it's a Nubian vaulted hut or a consorted agricultural innovation, or even the M-Pesa system that's been innovated recently in Nairobi, and some of these impressive innovations that are ongoing and have been going for hundreds of years.
I agree with that. But some might say we cannot play traditional methods today. How would you respond to that?
I'd respond that like, even to segregate tradition as some kind of other is problematic, like to say this is modern because it has these properties and this is traditional. It's like, okay, but what separates them? If you really think about it, one of them is just, it's using newer materials or using newer, but there is a connected chain of events that led to the kind of innovations that we have today. And if you can see and perceive those connections, and see that even the most modern of innovation is rooted in something that came before it, standing on the shoulders of giants, as Newton put it, then you automatically have you have more of that kind of honoring.
That's what you want quote. I actually personally myself believe in that. I've stood on many giants so I can see further. So one conscious action someone could listen today, what could they do to start making a difference?
Yes, I think I think what we could do to start making a difference is see what your kind of personal village looks like. I think the sort of village think is the thing that most inspired me in my travels back home to understand that this way of thinking that incorporates everyone, and then seeing what is around you. And while I'm very fortunate to have roots in Africa, I know that like we all kind of come from, we all at some point have been in, village think. And it's like, what is around you? What am I connected to? We're now part of
Yes,
the
indeed.
largest but most contained village we've ever been part of, where the whole world is connected. And it's just about seeing, like, now how can I see how um something right next door is able to, facilitate creating systems of sustainability. That might mean um like using, so there's an app called FreeCycle, or a website called FreeCycle, where people are just, giving possessions that they don't need. That's a form of sustainability in and of itself. Facebook Marketplace, I genuinely say, is a good way of sustainability. These are ways of plugging in, and sometimes the most sustainable thing you can do is just be attuned to the world around you and be aware of the way that you're consuming. And I know that's just the beginning, but it is really more about changing the way you think. And then when you've changed the way you think, the inspiration that comes to you becomes more aligned with this philosophy. And then the innovations that you come up with,
That's true.
are almost just by nature of the way that you're already approaching the problem. And it's seeking inspiration in things like this. Being learned, I still have a lot of research to do and a lot of diving to do into my own tradition and culture, which is often less explored purely by the nature of it not being understood when it was first encountered. And being very specific about saying, like, I want to know more about this. And honestly, because there are not many books out there, the best way of doing that is by having conversations. So I think we need to be having conversations with each other, whether we be technical, whether we be sociological, whether we be historical in nature. Like, these disciplinary boundaries, if they can be dispelled, then we're all attuned to everyone's needs.
That's true. Yeah.
So even
Adoption, yes.
Yeah, me and you as the technical specialist are still thinking with this kind of group, this communal way of thinking, to say, like, how do I use my skill set to solve the needs of the whole?
Well, Alex, what's next for you then at Loughborough University? And you said in projects or collaborations coming up?
Yes, I've been so my PhD is going to take the next year, duration of the next year. I actually started when I joined Loughborough. My big aim was to work on space projects. I really do believe that space is the next frontier, the final frontier, and that we should all have an interest in space travel. I do think that at the moment there is a large hyper-capitalist presence in that sector, but I think it's still relevant to everyone, and our ability to go, and we could be mining asteroids for resources as opposed to mining impoverished countries. And I think that's a better aim to set our sights at. So I would like my research to sort of return to space at some point.
Yes, indeed.
I'm currently my research group in Crest is working on a collaborative project with Cambridge. Can't want to say too much on it, but really exciting stuff involved in solar. So we're always connected to the vast web of human achievement. And when I think the important thing to say is, when I uplift the indigenous voice, that's not to say that, like, all these impressive current technical innovations. We've had an episode on nanotechnology. We've had episodes on all kinds of novel things that are happening in the world right now. And it doesn't mean be less excited. I think often people, when, like, you're either tradition, no progress, or you're progress without tradition. It's marrying those two together and saying, no, progress is amazing.
Like, I agree.
We should be striving and reaching for the stars, and reaching as far as our minds can take us, and technology will take us into new ground. But we can do that in a better way, a more sustainable way. And that starts by changing the way you approach these situations. And I genuinely think that that comes with more inspiration, because it's like, how can this technology benefit everyone as opposed to exploit or leave people behind?
Yes, indeed. Well, Alex, thank you for sharing your vision and your energy. It's been inspiring hearing you talk about sustainable development, how it's indigenous in Africa and urgent today. Well, if anyone wanted to talk to Alex, his contact details are...
You can reach me at a.haydock-wilson at loughborough.act.uk.
Well, thank you, viewers. This has been another episode of Sustainably Smart Talks. I'm your host, AJ Makarapa. Thank you.
Thank you very much.